I'm glad that we've had this conversation, maybe, 20 minutes without hardly mentioning AI. Talk about AI all the time, but AI will only accelerate,
Should I cross the next question off my list, right?
I don't know, but we can talk about AI.
I'm excited to be here today with Alan Gonsenhauser, who's an interim CMO, go-to-market advisor, and coach to CMOs in private equity environments. Thanks for coming on the show, Alan.
For inviting me. I'm thrilled to be here, Matt.
We're going to have a lot of fun today. I think you've got a great perspective working with a lot of private equity owned companies, which are really a growth engine for a lot of sectors across the economy. So you built a really interesting and distinctive niche serving private equity backed companies. What are the biggest gaps you typically encounter when you work with a company, either as an interim CMO or an advisor and coach, and how do you prioritize what to fix first?
So I never come on like a ton of bricks. I come on at the beginning asking a lot of questions and building relationships both with the C-suite or ELT, my peers, and with the marketing folks. So I like to ask everybody, what are you most proud of? What are the things you're really proud of that's worked well? And where do you think the gaps are? And if I could give you 3 magic wishes, what would they be? And I asked that of every C-suite member and, CFO, all of them, and every marketing person. And it's amazing what you pick up that way. I don't come out, even if I may have some ideas on my previous experience, I never try to, push those on folks at the beginning. I like to learn first. And, some of the things I see over and over again, usually when private equity brings me in, there's some kind of a problem. There's some kind of an inflection point. Maybe it's a carve out, maybe it's M&A, maybe the pipeline is not going as well, maybe there are churn issues. The things I like to look for first, and this ties into customer experience and change management, is do they have a churn issue? Are customers churning? Because I find that many companies do, because they're not really good about being very specific on what the right ideal customer profile is upfront. And even if they are, they may not have that worked out cross-functionally. Can't just be a marketing thing or a sales thing. It's got to be a business thing, from the CEO, CFO, all the functions. And you've got to have governance around that ICP. You may, even if you have it, defined, but then each quarter you got to make the quarter, and sales will bring on anything they can to make the number. And then you may be buying debt instead of buying churn. So I think, like you, I'm big on the customer experience. And I sometimes call myself a customer capitalist, because I think all future financial performance is really decked against creating a remarkable customer experience, and not only bringing on customers that you can more easily acquire, let's say your win-loss ratio, but customers you can keep, gross revenue retention, and customers you can grow, net revenue retention. So if you can triangulate among those 3 and pick the right ICP and have governance around it, that'll fix a lot of issues. Having said that, I see a lot of other issues with PE owned companies, like, Frankenstacks. If they've been doing a lot of M&A and you have a lot of Salesforce and marketing automation instances, and some companies, have really dirty data. I think on average about 47% of CRM systems are really dirty. And I've seen companies that can't even get a good customer list. So there are a lot of those types of things as well. So I think it's important to learn at the beginning and then prioritize 3 things you want to make an impact on, in terms of the infrastructure: people, process, technology, data analytics, brand gravity.
It's interesting with companies as they grow. A lot of early stage companies have really strong founders, and they have, like, what's the mantra of a lean startup? we used to give out the book, The Lean Startup, to all employees at Booz Digital when I was one of the founders there. It's like, the blue book the Bible of startups. Um, and I love the framing in there around every company has to get two things right: who's the customer and what's the value prop. And if you don't get those two questions right, you run out of money.
Exactly. And once you have that, articulating it properly so people get it.
So like early stage companies struggle or get that right, and then they get hyper growth, right? And then as they grow, it's like plaque on teeth. Problems emerge, right? And that's actually often where things break down. Is as companies get bigger, their strength can become their weakness, and they end up doing things that are expedient and or don't pay attention to things because they have short-term issues to grapple with. And eventually you end up, no one intentionally has bad data or intentionally results in a churn problem, but they dealt with other things, and now they have to face up to dealing with something that they let become a problem that festers. And then they bring you in to fix it.
Yeah. And I think, hey, companies go through inflection points. When they're a startup, they've got to get problem market fit. They have to define some problems that people are willing to pay for. And in that phase, you do a lot of experimentation. So you try a lot of different things because you're trying to figure it out. And if you're successful there, then you go into a phase which is um, you go from problem market fit to product market fit. And that's where you have to start building some systems and you have to build some scalability in the business. And if you're successful there, further along, you can get to platform market fit where it's different again, and the majority of your sales are going to be from existing customers. Most likely, you'll still have new business, but you know I've seen issues with companies going through those different pivot points, and the questions you need to ask yourself and the competencies that you need to have are different in each of those.
What's interesting is you talked about like the magic wand question. Like if you had a magic wand, what are the three things that you would fix right away? And um, I think this is like, and again, bringing it back to like lean startup thinking, I often think, Alan, there's like a 3-month, 3-year trade-off, right? If you look over 3 years, you often can think about, well, what would we do to fix this problem? You can think bigger. And then you want to think of what's the minimum viable product, like the right first step on the journey to get to that vision. They're both valuable. Having a vision and having short-term performance is obviously really important. It sounds like, you when you come in, you already have some mandate to fix something that's really important, but you still have to break that down into measurable and actionable things you can do in a few months.
Absolutely, and I think that balance between short and long-term financial performance is really critical. And that's where a lot of companies have issues. They're trying to make this quarter and the next quarter. But if you don't have brand gravity, you won't have your pipeline next year, you know? And if you don't have brand gravity, even, 95% of customers or companies are not looking to buy something now, but they will in the next 18 months or 2 years. And if you don't have brand gravity and they're not consuming your content, even though they're not in market now, when they do get in market, 95% of the time they will buy from someone on that short list of 4 to 5 vendors. So, thinking long term and short term is really important for balance and for financial performance.
You worked with both B2C and B2B companies.
Mainly, I've worked with B2B and B2B2C. I don't really work with direct to consumer or B2C, although I've stolen a lot of things from B2C models over time.
Yeah, it's a good distinction. You know, it's most people don't necessarily pick up on this, but consumer brands are mostly B2B to C. And that they actually have, increasingly invested also in direct to consumer. A great example would be like travel and hospitality that go through intermediaries like Expedia, but they actually get about 30 to 40% of the sales now directly to the consumer. In like, beauty markets, it's like 10%. In food, it's like 1%.
I don't know anything about those markets except I love to eat and drink, but In healthcare and financial services, you have a lot of B2B to C as well. And that's where I have a lot of experience.
Yeah, those are really big markets. I personally started in the retail and media spectrum, retail, consumer, and media spaces, and then broadened over time to work in healthcare and financial and industrial, like leveraging some of the digital and consumer experience work into other sectors, which is fun. Um, you know, so it's when you're talking about brand gravity in those, let's say, B2B or B2B2C markets. Um, how do you think about the connection of brand and customer experience? I think of them as two sides of a coin, but I'd love to get your thoughts about like how brand and customer experience go together.
They're very related. I mean, the customer experience begins when someone's a prospect and it goes through onboarding and the customer relationship and, retention and growth and advocacy and all that. Um, but, and again, when folks may not be in buying mode yet, they're still learning and they're, developing short lists of people they will consider eventually. And you want to get on their radar screen and you want to be someone where they know who you are and what your benefits are. So you'll have an at bat when they do get in market. But I think the more positive um, brand experience early on you give people, the better chance they're going to become clients. And when they become clients, if you engender um, a remarkable customer experience, um, brand and that working together will do a few things. First of all, it'll get you more at bats. It'll get you a better win loss ratio. It'll get you your future pipeline, and it'll give you more pricing power as an organization. So I know a lot of marketing folks have issues trying to communicate, why we should invest in brand, but there are, many financial reasons, long-term financial reasons why having brand gravity is really critical. And that's the start of the customer experience early on. Does that make sense?
It does. I think often with B2B companies, whether they're software as a service, data companies, other services companies, other manufacturing companies, they do have the customer life cycle as an important construct in common. You talked about, onboarding and customer acquisition. In B2B companies, in my experience, the first 90 days after signing up a customer is critical. It's like a magic window. If you don't get the customer experience right, converting from the sale to the onboarding experience, it poisons the whole relationship and your brand is destroyed.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And, Fred Reichheld, who, the father of NPS, with his newish book, Winning on Purpose, I think is a wonderful. He says a lot of companies give customer experience lip service. They say, oh, we're customer centric. But in his experience, only about 5% really are. They say they are, but your actions have to match what you say. And you really have to have talking about change management in the culture, which is right in the center of what you do with customer experience. That's exactly what Fred is saying. And the models that he's built for it.
Absolutely. And I tend to think of the customer experience delivers on your brand promise. And if you articulate as the business is growing and as the business is building out from that, product fit to platform fit to growing, the culture is how work gets done in the organization. It's the mindsets and behaviors and the skills of the people, and that actually is key. It's a complement to building capability in the company. If you don't pay attention to the culture, then things break down. You know what, that old adage of culture eats strategy for breakfast. Why is that? It's because behaviors are not. You end up with, like, again, with that plaque analogy. You end up with bad behaviors that crowd out good behaviors.
Yes. And, I've got to tell you, over 100 companies when I was at Serious Decisions in Forrester that had problems with alignment. Not because people didn't have good intentions, but they're going in different directions. And in fact, one of the founders of Serious Decisions, John Neeson, did a study of 400 B2B companies. I think there was some B2B to C in there also, and concluded, and this was years ago, but it still is valid today, companies that get aligned between sales, marketing, product and customer success and stay aligned, grow 19% faster and are 15% more profitable. It makes complete sense. And, overlay customer experience onto that alignment and culture. And those are the important factors in long-term growth, I think.
Yeah, that's why I think actually I've referenced this on the podcast before, and I'm collaborating with James Killian and Simon Robinson on this LX Accelerator, not net, our leadership accelerator. Folks could check out those episodes or go to the website if they want to see our collaboration. But we found each other because we all believe, Alan, in this concept of leadership experience. And the idea is like the value equation is value equals LX times parentheses CX plus EX. And the idea is you can't create value without touching either the customer or employee experience. And they both matter. And the way your leaders engage and foster the environment and coach people and demand performance and demand accountability, like the way your leaders engage and govern change amplifies your customer employee experience. A lot of times people focus on CX or EX without thinking explicitly around the leadership side of it, which is actually critical.
I couldn't agree more. Absolutely. And it's got to come from the CEO and the whole C-suite. Um, not just the words people say, but the actions they take. Even action CFO takes.
It's the behaviors.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The symbolic actions too. Like a great example of this is if you think of behavior in an organization like a bell curve, it's not necessarily normally distributed, maybe hopefully shifted to the right, maybe not, maybe shifted to the left. But what I mean on this is the middle of the bell curve is people engage in the behaviors you want some of the time, but not all of the time. And so the height of the bell curve is what proportion of the people, and the x-axis is how often they engage in the right behaviors. The right of the bell curve is the people who are doing all of the right things all the time. And they're the ones you want to showcase their success. You want to advance them.
Followership.
The far left are the hiring mistakes, right? You worry about where they can get to the other side of the transformation or of the change, whatever the skill gap is, whatever the change is right now. And what I think is fascinating is um, that when you think about like symbolic actions, and a great example of this would be if there are people who are poisoning the culture because they are essentially engaging in expedient decisions, and maybe they're doing things that are wrong, and if you don't deal with that and get the cancer out of the system and fire them, then it erodes the whole culture. So like a symbolic action would be to get rid of someone like that, even if you lose sales.
Yes. To make a point that we are customer centric and we are, yeah.
Yeah. So, when you coach and work with B2B CMOs, what separates the ones who become true growth champions, who become true change champions from the ones who are just stuck in execution mode?
Well, you hit on it, stuck in execution mode. Being an execution hero versus being a strategic operator. Those CMOs I see more successful. Number one, they learn the language of finance. So when they're presenting to the board or the C-suite, they're not talking, marketing speak. They're talking business speak. They're thinking about metrics like LTV to CAC, or lifetime value to customer acquisition cost, net revenue retention plus advocates. They're looking at, they're not just thinking short term, they're thinking long term as well. And they're not thinking of themselves as the leader of the marketing department per se, but as a business executive, acting more like a general manager. And they're carving out time for strategy. As busy as they get, and it's a very heady role with things coming at you all the time, but you have to carve out time for strategy. And you can't do 10 things well. You can do maybe 10 things, but you need to pick those 3 things you want to hit out of the park and make sure you focus on them first. So it's a combination of prioritization, language, being a real member of the C-suite, thinking from a business standpoint, I always, I started in finance before I went into marketing, and I've been in, 10, 11 CMO roles, including interim and three GM, P&L GM roles. And I always, developed a relationship with the CFO first. That's a really critical relationship for the CMO or the marketing leader to have, to speak the link. Because the CFO is tied into the board, C-suite, they're balancing, and you need to be on the same page. Develop metrics on the same page that the C-suite and the board can appreciate, and learn how to speak the language that the board speaks and the ELT speaks.
When I was at PwC, one of the service offerings I championed was something, Alan, we called return on experience.
Yeah.
And it was a play on words that PwC, it was on brand for PwC to put it in that language. But it was important because what you're talking about is a great marketing leader, whether word the same thing would be true of customer experience leader, which often your best sponsor of customer experience is a marketing leader who is a growth champion. If they're living up to what you're saying, that's why half of CX teams report up through marketing. Being in marketing is not a guarantor of success if you don't have the right marketing leadership. Um, but experience as a winning strategy often is led by marketing with a growth marketing mindset. It could be from a chief customer officer, chief revenue officer, more of a revenue operations mindset, which is broader than marketing subsumed into sales and service. In that case, if it's a chief revenue type model, marketing doesn't go away; it's just part of a broader team.
I sometimes get asked who should be responsible for customer experience. And I say, number one, the CEO. The CEO's got to set the culture, has got to set the tone. He or she can delegate, the day to day to a CCO, CMO, CRO, as long as it's ingrained in the culture and you've got that, customer success and employee success or employee experience, customer
I thought
experience.
you were going to say the answer is who should own that, and the answer is yes. Because it
Well, the
should be
answer is yes, yes.
no, it's like it's always when people say, should it be in marketing or sales? And the answer is yes, because they have to collaborate, right? So like
Exactly.
if the CEO needs to own it, and if you really, in some cases, integrating marketing, sales, and service through a chief revenue or chief customer or chief commercial makes sense. In other cases, it doesn't, in which case you have to collaborate at the C level. And ultimately, it's the C level team and the CEO that own the strategy and the culture.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's alignment, getting every function aligned.
Yeah.
CFOs
And,
too.
and you were also talking the language of outcomes, which is that, a lot of people talk about marketing needs to speak finance. Well, what this is not just about persuasion, it's about taking accountability and helping drive outcomes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that's where a lot of the people, if you look across the customer experience industry, which is really hard to call it an industry because it sits in so many different places, but
Yes.
um, there have been a lot of layoffs in the last year. Why is that? Well, I tend to view it as a glass half full, half empty type of world. If the people involved in experience management are actually driving change, they're focused on outcome, they're partnering well in the business, they're leading opportunities with AI and analytics, then they're expanding their impact.
Yes.
And increasingly, like you'll see the champions of experience be in the analytics team or the strategy team or strong CMOs, and they're able to be successful with the CX teams. If the CX people are chasing survey scores and they're just doing what Zach Hamilton calls incense, he was on my podcast recently. He has a book called Experience Performance System. If they're just doing insights theater, they're getting laid off. So like people who lament, like people don't get it, and like they don't get customers. Actually, the issue is a challenge of leadership. They're actually not focused on outcomes and that focus. They're whining about other people not giving them what they want rather than leading the change.
And I think ultimately if I would pick a metric, it would be net revenue retention plus the new business you get from advocates. That's what Fred Reichelt said. He calls it earned growth. So it's net revenue retention. Any company that has net revenue retention over 120%, at gross margins they want to be at is a really successful company. And when you get more new business from satisfied customers that are advocates and love what you do, that's much easier way to get, new customers than, pay for them.
So what you're talking about now is how do you drive experience as a winning strategy, which is actually the name of one of my mastermind groups. So see what I did there? I created a segue for the mastermind groups. Let's run a quick sizzle reel about the couple mastermind groups I do, and then we'll talk more on the other side. Allow me to briefly interrupt the podcast to share an invitation for you to join one of our mastermind groups. These groups are for leaders building out the CX function at their organization. They are for culture champions looking to develop and sustain behaviors that bring their organization's mission, vision, purpose, and values to life. I'm excited to team with Randy Rothenberg, former CEO of the IAB, on a mastermind group focused on experience as a winning marketing strategy. I'm teaming with Tamar Cohen, who has led CX and EX teams at Zoetis and Travelers, on another group focused on CX EX alignment. Each group meets monthly for 90 minutes. Members receive a coaching hour each month and can attend quarterly workshops. Go to Journey Spark's website for more information. Please DM me on LinkedIn with any questions. Now, let's get back to the podcast. Alan, one of the things we've been talking about is how marketing can be a champion for change, and how you work with either with marketing or as the leader of marketing, interim basis, with the CEO to help drive a few key priorities, right? That you align on, a few key priorities that you're going to really drive a few things really well and drive change in the organization with the leaders in the organization. One of the things we were just talking about is how marketing and sales and customer experience go together. What are some of the most effective ways you've seen CMOs and other champions like chief revenue, chief customer, chief commercial drive, results from experience as a winning strategy? What are some of the plays in the playbook that you see them run?
First, they have to get together, break bread, develop relationships. I would include those functions. I'd also include the CFO, but develop those relationships. And I also see, periodic meetings to work through issues together, so you get everybody's perspective. Beyond that, I think there are a couple of things that are really important. One is to have clean data. If you've had a lot of M&A and you're not sure your database is clean, make it a thing, invest and get clean data, because it's very hard for sales and marketing to be really accurate without clean data as a bedrock, as a foundation. Um, uh, and Data is not power, access to it is, having access to the right data at the right time. And, of course, I know, I'm glad that we've had this conversation maybe, 20 minutes without hardly mentioning AI. Say, talk about AI all the time, but, AI will only
Should I
accelerate,
should I should I should I cross the next question off my list, right?
I don't know, but we can talk about AI if you like. I talk about it all the time. I live on it all the time. But and then the other thing, and I mentioned this earlier, where I see a lot of organizations having issues is alignment. But if you can pick a specific thing that creates a lot of downstream issues, it's alignment on the ideal customer profile and governance around the ideal customer profile. When you're trying to make the quarter and you'll sell anything to make that number, if it's not a customer you can keep and grow, you're buying debt and churn instead of buying future profitable business. And I mean, there are a couple of ways. I mean, one kind of Machiavellian way is saying, no comp on anything that isn't ICP. That might be a little bit too difficult. Maybe, multipliers for new business that is in the ICP is a better way of doing it. I don't know. But that's a problem I see over and over. And, getting people on the same page, getting them aligned, doing aligned annual planning and aligned 3-year strategic planning as a C-suite is critically important. And having the right metrics so the organization defines what good looks like across all the functions, and watching that and developing metrics that are action oriented and being transparent with each other on the good news. If there's good news, it's not just good news. How do you keep it going and extend it? But, when things aren't going right, being very transparent, talking about it right away, especially with private equity. The worst thing you do with private equity is hide bad news, and delay. So I think it's relationship and getting some of the fundamentals right and understanding as an organization what are the key priorities. Not that you're not going to do other things later, but what are the key priorities now? That's leadership.
So you did open the door on AI, or I should say you slammed it. But I'm gonna edge it back open a little
Okay.
bit here. Um, with a B2B lens, right? So like I do people who are regulars in the audience know that I straddle both B2B and B2C, and that I'm doing a lot with AI today. I'm actually one of my clients, where my partner Randall and I are working, is a strategic advisor to agenticadvertising.org, Alan. So it's a new association serving both B2B and B2C companies, more on the B2C side, but also on the B2B, um, or B2B to C, as you would put it, where agentic is changing the way marketing works. In advertising, what that means is not just buying and selling advertising like programmatic advertising, which is clearly more a B2C phenomena, um, but also like all the millions of hours that go into creating campaigns, creating great content, creating testing and learning and optimization of content that drives conversion, optimizing your advertising together with your owned media and your earned media. In the B2B world, there's more focus on trade shows and events and selling and website and content marketing than advertising as a way of driving lead gen, but advertising plays a supportive role. And then I also am working with other clients about how to drive AI into the organization of marketing, sales, and service, which is a significant change in culture challenge.
Absolutely. Change management more than anything. Yeah.
That often, is a culture challenge because people will resist fully adopting the change unless they can be proud of the impact they're having about how they redeploy the saved time. If you focus the time on just capturing the savings, you end up creating built-in resistance. But if you actually focus on what people are going to do with the time they free up, so more effectiveness and efficiency, then you tap into their pride and their energy. It becomes a positive force for energy versus resistance. I'd love to get your thoughts on, in your B2B world or B2B to C, where do you see the opportunities for AI in marketing, and what are some of the things you're working on with to capture those opportunities?
So first of all, it's astonishing what models like Claude Cowork is doing. I'm living on it. I can't believe all the things it does. I'm a big proponent of it. And it's the world is going that way. It's a disruptive innovation, and it's we're not going back. Um, Obviously, some things in B2B that AI has been used in marketing are things like content creation. And what I would say with content creation, let it learn how you write, but also let it learn how you speak. Get transcripts of all your videos. I got transcripts of all my podcasts. I've been a guest on about 179, and it's got my speaking voice and it has my writing voice. And I say, you know, go a little more to the speaking because that's natural, and so it's really good for content creation. Obviously, you have to check it. You've got to, make sure it passes a smell test. It will hallucinate from time to time. You have to prompt it right. Um, AI is the models, the LLMs are really good at summarizing what happened in the past very quickly, going through a lot of data. What they suck at is breakthrough thinking and different thinking and divergent thinking. You need humans for that, or humans um, that can prompt the models effectively. One person, I don't know if you know Jeff Woods. He came out with a book called got it here about halfway through, The AI Driven Leader. And he works with CEOs on how to use AI as a thought partner to prompt it. But you have to be very careful because AI, for example, if AI would look at Kodak's business, it would have told them, sell more film, be more productive at selling film. Or if it would looked at Blockbuster, be more productive at late fees. It wouldn't have gotten the Netflix or the digital photography.
One of my recent podcasts guests was Bernie Jaworski, who I don't know if you know Bernie. He's a professor at the Claremont School. He's the Drucker Chair. This is like the literal chair that Drucker used to sit in at Claremont, right? Um, Brilliant guy. He used to lead the e-commerce practice at Monitor. And then he became a professor, and I've had him on the podcast a couple of times. His latest book is called The Soul of Strategy. I really recommend it to folks. I did a book review of it. And what we were talking about around his book is this idea of abandonment. And that if you're not challenging assumptions, if you're not actually taking a systematic way to build evidence and challenge conventional thinking, you're not going to get innovative breakthroughs. And I'm actually gonna, I don't know if this is pushing back, but make a suggestion. I totally agree that you need a human in the loop for breakthrough thinking and creative thinking. The same would be true on creating content. The same would be true on strategy, but you can take it with a model that incorporates AI to
Well, yeah, I'm
support
not
human
saying you can't.
beings.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm agreeing with you. Here's an example of that. In a recent client engagement that I've been working on, I should say an ongoing client engagement. One of the things we did early on, and this is around adoption of AI in marketing to get to more than half the time saved in marketing and redeploy it to more effectiveness. So we're not trying to save the time to save cost. We're saving the time to achieve their mission better, faster. Okay. Um, and this actually is enormous opportunity across content development, marketing campaigns, product innovation, website. There's a lot of human time that goes into those.
Quickly on leads.
Yeah, a lot of time that goes into activities like you call out content, which is a huge driver across industries. Um, in this particular case, we applied something I learned with strategic innovation in I'm now using in customer experience. Love to get your thoughts on it. So what we did is in strategic innovation, I learned this with uh, people can check out my Art of Ideas, a book by Amy Murphy. I worked with her at PwC. What this practice is what you do is all great innovation actually is applying existing things in new ways. So you're discovering what people already know and applying it in a new way. And there's nothing new under the sun, said Shakespeare, right? And so what you do is you take your strategic um, opportunity you're working on and you break it down into discrete challenges. And then what you do is you look for how other people have solved that challenge. And by prompting the AI, if you as a human frame up the challenges and prompt the AI to look for how other people have solved it, this is what in the past we would use consultants and teams. Now you can do it. And if you do actually, if I took all of your podcasts and all of your writing, I could create a digital twin of Alan.
Which I've
So
done,
yeah, and I did that for
which is great.
myself. We do,
Yeah.
and what you do is you essentially ask what are examples of other people who've solved this challenge, and you iterate and go back and forth with the AI, and you can essentially come up with this, and this is then you spark innovation off on top of that. If you jump straight to ideation without looking for examples of how people have solved it, you get very narrow incrementalist answers. But this is actually a great opportunity to use AI together with human beings. I would still welcome the brainstorming, involving the ideas of all the people and doing all the workshops. But this is a complement to spark their thinking.
Couldn't agree more. And I think what you're talking about is prompting AI properly to get strategic breakthrough thinking. And all I was trying to say, it has to come from the human first to prompt AI correctly. AI can be a great thought partner. I think that's what this book is all about, AI driven leader. But you have to prompt it correctly. You can't just ask it to set your strategy for you, or your strategy is going to be the same as everybody else, and anybody with an LLM could.
And then you take the insights and you bring them into human conversation, human workshops. If you just use the AI to come up with the answer, it's like you're not done yet. You still have to get the human beings to engage.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's I think a uh, great insight, which is Alan, that in the B2B world and the B2C world, what you do with AI is a catalyst. It's not the solution.
And the other thing to keep in mind, I think, with AI is you can't put AI on bad processes. If you don't fix the process first, AI is just going to accelerate the confusion.
It just magnifies bad practices. It's paving the cow path, right?
Exactly. Or good practices, but it magnifies whatever you give it.
Exactly, exactly. As we wrap up, Alan, do you have any last advice for folks, or any closing words of wisdom for B2B CMOs?
I think B2B CMOs need to go beyond being, as I said before, the leader of marketing. They can, to your point in our discussion, they can also be the chief customer officer at times, depending on the organization. I think they can be the convener in chief, but it's important to bring people together and to, as busy as they get, focus on the top three things that are really going to move the needle. Learn to speak the language of the board and the C-suite. Help other functions with things they need as well, and be a real business general manager. And hopefully you'll be in an organization that has a real customer orientation. And don't get caught up with demand or short-term thinking at the expense of long-term success. And that success is going to be based on driving net revenue retention and advocates that your sales and profit are all in the rearview mirror. Your future success is based on what you do with your customers, bringing on the right ones, keeping them, growing them, giving them a remarkable experience from the beginning, from the onboarding in the first 60 days, as you brought. And those things are going to be more correlated with your future success than anything. And when you talk about brand, just don't say we need to invest more in brand. Understand what the financial implications, because there are really, really important financial implications of investing in brand gravity.
That's fantastic. Alan, if folks want to get in touch with you, is LinkedIn the best way, or should they do anything else?
LinkedIn, but my name is really hard to spell. So the easiest thing would be to go to demandrevenue.com, and my email is ag@demandrevenue.com to make it easier.
I know you've sparked a lot of great ideas for me. I'm sure you have for the audience. Thanks for coming on the pod.
Thank you so much. Great, great being here, Matt. Thanks for inviting me.